Good morning, one and all. Professor Anil here. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Morning,
So
sir.
on behalf of School of Management, Presidency University, Bangalore, it is my privilege to invite one and all to this webinar series. We have been hosting a series of webinars from School of Management, and this being the day for operations webinar, I would be very happy to see many students and faculty members would be attending this webinar to gain a lot from operations specialist, Mr. Mukund, who has come over here, who has spared his valuable time to share his experience from Volvo. He is currently the Director, Industry Development Operations, and we will be very lucky, we'll be very honored to listen to you, sir. I formally invite you, and I now request our Dean, Dr. Gunjit Kaur, to formally render the welcome address. Thank you.
Yeah, Gunjit madam, I think you have joined.
Madam is joined.
Yeah.
Good morning,
Madam.
madam.
Yeah. Madam.
Good morning.
Yeah.
Good morning, madam.
Welcome the guest. Yeah.
I just introduced what the topic is and who our speaker is, and I now request our Dean, Dr. Gunjit Kaur, to formally welcome the gathering. Over to you.
Good morning to all. Good morning, Mukund. It's really a pleasure having you accept our invitation to deliver your knowledge and experience to our participants, including the students, faculty members. I'm sure they are going to, gain a lot from your experience. And I'm really happy that, we have such a senior person from such a renowned company, sharing his experiences and knowledge with School of Management students and faculty members. I'm sure, because operations as such had really landed into, trouble for those that were doing physical, operations during pandemic and COVID, and for online, I think their task doubled. So I'm sure students would love to hear from you, your experiences, and I welcome you to School of Management webinar. And I'm looking forward to having you on the campus once the campus becomes fully operational. Welcome, Mukund.
Thank you, madam. And in fact, it's a pleasure that I take this privilege to introduce Mr. Mukund. Mr. Mukund G is Director, Industry Operations and key member of management team in Buses Division of VE Commercial Vehicles, Bangalore. He brings insights gained over 3 decades of experience as key member of supply chain and operations leadership positions of large organizations. As an engineer by qualification and leader by training, Mukund has a track record of achieving breakthrough solutions in business challenges of various organizations by building strategies, strong teams, and stakeholder relationships. Experiences as frontline manager in operations before being elevated to general management and strategic roles has given him an appreciation of business contexts and the inherent opportunities and challenges. In his current organization, he has played a key role right since start of the project and has been a driving force in setting up supply chain with an insight of market dynamics and customer demands unique to bus business, which has led him to take on higher responsibilities, including recent overseas assignment of Asia Pacific region based out of Singapore, handling manufacturing operations spread across 13 countries for over 5 years prior to returning to India. To take on his current role of managing plant operations encompassing manufacturing, industry engineering, quality, supply chain, planning, and distribution. And not to mention, during the pandemic, Mukund has played a key role in response management team in the group, including setting up of processes for return of employees to workplace post-lockdown, monitoring of employees' health conditions, and driving implementation of safety practices to ensure workplace is safe from the spread of COVID-19 virus. In addition, to mitigate the risk due to reduced market size, he has also worked on several projects resulting in reduction of break-even volumes of the businesses. So a hearty welcome to Mr. Mukund. It's a pleasure having you here. Over to you now. I think I will give you controls as a host. I think then you can start sharing. If you can please start sharing your screen, let me please check. I have already given you the controls.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I hope you're able to see my screen.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes.
Great. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning to share my experiences. I would like to thank the management of the Presidency University School of Management, Dr. Gunjit Kaur, Dr. Anil Gowda, and Dr. Amrita for this wonderful opportunity. In today's session, I would like to keep it more interactive through short stories, and I hope you all find this interesting. Today, we would look at what strategies are. Why does one need to adopt one? When to adopt it? How do we go about it? And what are the benefits one gets out of it? So I would like to take you through the strategies through 7 simple steps, which formally starts with formulating the vision, which in simple words we would say as begin with the end in mind. Then to be proactive in thinking and prioritize what we need to do. Moving on to looking at what was the win-win solution when the plan is executed, and how do we take the team along. And finally, also to understand the situation and the people involved in it, rather than pushing through the thoughts to be understood first. And during the course, it's important to revisit if the plan is going as expected, or else do some changes while we are moving. And I would like to take a moment to thank Stephen Covey for putting across this simple 7 habits of highly effective people, which I think is pretty much helping us today put together the knowledge of strategic management in very simple ways. So I would like to take you through some of the stories, what we have experienced on how do we plan, how do we prepare, and how do we execute. Today in this whole session, what I want to be sharing is how to be efficient in operations, and at the same time, how to get more money out of every dollar that is spent through the 3 steps of planning, preparing, and executing the strategies. The main objective in a business is not just to improve the bottom line through price realizations from the customer or through the negotiations of the suppliers, but is also through efficiency improvement in the process. And as we all heard, I come from a commercial vehicle business, more in particular as a transport solutions provider for the public. While that's an interesting topic, but the business model is quite seasonal in nature. What does this mean? We are usually flooded with customer inquiries and orders only during specific periods or months in a calendar, though we have a capacity in the manufacturing plant which is spread even throughout the year. And to give you a short background, I started in this company as head of purchasing and supply chain way back in 2007 when the plant was still being set up for the operations. The commercial operations commenced in the year 2008. We had an annual capacity of 400 units to be produced in the first year, and we wanted to ramp it up to 1,000 units within the next few years. As a purchasing manager, one had to negotiate the parts prices based on these annual volumes at the start of every year, as well as whenever the raw material prices fluctuated. And the raw material prices fluctuation are always governed by external factors. So after start of operations in 2009, when we move ahead further, in the year 2009, we had a volume of about 500 units to be produced. And of this 500 units, about 40% of orders were expected to be delivered to institutional customers like public transport organizations, city bus corporations. To delve a little more onto the business aspects, any institutional order is governed through tenders from time to time. And these tenders, as we all know, will be a long drawn process from the board approval to the order placement on the original equipment manufacturers, whom we call as OEMs. On the other hand, a private customer order would probably need just a week's time from the thought of buying a bus to placing an order, provided the financial aspects were secured. With about 500 units in plan and securing a tender for a little over 200 units in the second year of operation, probably during the second quarter of the year, we had the challenge of securing better margins in this bulk order, as normally institutional orders are quite stretched and the prices are very stressed given the bulk volumes and the buying patterns. If the order has to be secured at a lower price than the usual market price, how does one then secure the margins? Here I'd like to quote an industrialist and a CEO with whom I had an opportunity to work in the past, Mr. K.K. Noria, Managing Director and CEO of Crompton Greaves Limited. He said, money never comes through the front door. It has to be secured through the back door. He always believed and pushed the purchasing teams to secure margins through the parts pricing than expecting your customers to pay higher prices to improve your profitability. And so we had the challenge of going back to our suppliers for negotiating the prices, given the fact we had already signed the contract for 500 units for the year. With this background, I would like to look at the 5 golden rules in purchasing. We needed the price reductions from all commodities, all sorts of suppliers, to be able to bridge the gap or say minimize the impact due to the reduced order value per unit. With this, we set ourselves to take up discussions with key suppliers. One such company supplying a proprietary design product, which is associated with one of the key product features of ours. Hence, the chances of price reduction was also not easier, as neither the product nor the part design was owned by us or the toolings or the process. But we didn't give up. We did our homework, analyzing the product structure, the raw material content, the likely cost of manufacturing, and the overheads. And then we looked at a value of 25,000 rupees per unit on their product cost, which was 16% of their overall product cost. Reason? The products being supplied by them would have the same specification throughout the batch, and hence they should be able to manage their supply chain unlike a private customer orders, where each one would be different from the other, even if it's just a 2 bus units order. Any guess where did we reach? We eventually got them to give away 9% of their total product cost, which was little more than 50% on the target what we set on to reach. Hence, it's very important to always start with a very high initial demand. Let's move on to the next golden rule. We should always stick to our position from start. As we moved on into the third year of the operations, when we decided to upgrade some of the features in the product, we had to develop some new parts with the suppliers. And these suppliers were already leaders in their products, involving bulk production processes, as well as raw materials whose prices were determined on a monthly basis. And these suppliers and their likes were always supplying large quantities, and the payments to them were always against the pro forma invoice. And as we know, pro forma invoices are payments to be made in advance prior to the supplies. And we, as Volvo, we were also known for products, and being a multinational, we also had our financial policies, which restricts any advance payment to suppliers. How did we tide over this situation? I think it's getting a bit more interesting. Let's take a quick walkthrough on how we managed it. Suppliers, they supply only against advance payment, whereas our rationale was no advance payment. And our payment terms to them was 60 days credit. Supplier came back with a counter offer that they would accept 30 days post-dated check. And we stuck to our 60 days credit. We got a final offer from the supplier saying that they would accept 45 days post-dated check. Our stance, we would move on to 60 days RTGS payment. And eventually, we signed up for a 50 days RTGS. The simple explanation was, if they had to deposit a check on the 45th day, given the weekends or any national holidays, they would be able to encash them only after 4 or 5 days. And hence, with the RTGS, they would get it at the click of a button. While I had taken internal permissions to go ahead with the 45 days credit. So, what does this change in the payment terms really mean to business, other than just securing the cash? I think for this, we first need to understand the payment and the working capital management, which I'm sure you're all aware in your academics, but I think it's good to refresh. From the time a supplier delivery is done, and if an advance payment is made to the supplier, till the time the product is sold to the customer and the customer pays the money, which we call as receivables, the time gap in between where we have blocked our cash is called working capital, and it's called working capital management. What happens when we move this into a credit term? No.
Please continue.
Yeah.
Your screen is visible now to us.
Just give me a second. Yeah, so as I was mentioning, from the time when you move on to an advance payment to a credit period, we can see that the working capital or the money that is blocked in the business actually reduces. So how does it look when we change this, and what actually happens? A part pricing is generally consisting of 2 parts. One is the parts cost and the inventory carrying cost, which is what we call as landed cost. And when you change the payment terms from an advance to a certain period, which we did in this case is 50 days, without negotiating the parts price, it adds on to 1.94 on an example of 100 rupees unit price. And that's a lot when we are working on hundreds and thousands of parts when we work with the suppliers. So with this, we move on to the next rule, which is if you have to take back a step in the negotiations, we need to take tiny steps. And if you go back to the same example of negotiating the payment terms with the supplier, it gives them a sense of win-win situation. We were in for a 60 days payment credit and we signed up for a 50 days RTGS. So the supplier feels that they have eventually got what they want, and we also have managed to get what we want. Let's move on to the golden rule number 4. We should never give a concession without getting something first. During the same year, as I was mentioning, when we were introducing a lot of new features, we also had to pay the tooling cost to the suppliers. But as a matter of principle, we did not want to pay the tooling cost upfront. We had to pay it on a later date once tool was built and the product has been developed. So this is, and there are ways to do that. And one such way is to add the tooling cost as a percentage of the part cost, which is called as amortization in purchasing terminology. When the part prices were finalized, we had to pay the tooling cost. And we insisted that we will do it as a part of the part cost, as I said. But then we have a policy of doing amortization over a period of 3 years, but the supplier was insisting we do it over 1 year. So we ended up negotiating further to reduce the component cost. And then there was another supplier who was insisting that if there was any late payment, there will be a penalty to it. We agreed, but we also introduced another counter offer to that, saying that for every late delivery, they will also have to have a penalty. So I think it's important to get the suppliers or the negotiating party to own the decisions. And that is what we come to when we get into our 5th rule. So that there is a win-win feel, as I said before, in the whole process. So when I said we were negotiating the tooling, we were also in an urgency to introduce it as early as possible. And the supplier was saying the tooling lead time is anything between 6 to 8 weeks, but we were pushing it for an earlier or a shorter lead time. And eventually we got the whole tool delivered within 5 weeks. I think these are simple aspects in purchasing management as strategies to work with when we work with the parties in an organization, so that we are able to enhance the profitability or improve the profitability through various aspects of business. With that, I would like to move on to the operations part of it. Here comes the another side of the business, which is even more interesting, challenging, sometimes even unpredictable, because this involves emotions, be it customer or the employees. I think it must be sounding strange. Let's move on. As we were progressing through the years in operations, we also had to face some challenges with the workforce. Not because there was a formation of workers' union, but due to industrial disputes. And I think this is quite common in almost every industry, particularly during the early years of operation, as both management and the union are still trying to understand each other in their relationship. Just like a married couple, honeymoon period is always interesting. Then there are some tussles, frictions. And then when we get to understand each other, life turns out to be happier than before. This is exactly what happened in this story too. So here again, let's come back to our first step in the 7 steps. Begin with the end in mind. In any normal year of operation, we have 50 working weeks, which is 250 working days. And in the first year of operation, we had a target of 400 units. And we did sell exactly the same. Doctor, I need to pause for a minute. There is an urgent call which is coming in, if you don't mind.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So typically what happens in any year is we got to produce what is in the business plan within the number of days. And as I was mentioning, we had ramp up plans to move on from 400 units the first year over the next few years to 1000. And the second year, we had a plan to reach 500 and we did manage to reach 535. This was, of course, using some efficiency improvement in the processes, what we're doing, and also with some additional hours and days of working. But the third year did see a dip in the number of working days, primarily due to months strike from the workforce, which did hit us in not being able to deliver the planned volumes. And that end of year became actually a very interesting year and a turning point in my career. I think you guessed it right. I was given the responsibility to take over the plant operations from purchasing, leaving behind my 2 decades of passion just to find another. How did I take this? What motivated me to accept the change? Me, out of curiosity and more of anxiety, walked up to my manager and asked him, why was he betting on a horse which hasn't run this race in the past? And he, in a very simple and highly motivating way, said, don't worry, if you succeed, we have succeeded. If you fail, we have learned. Mark those words. That was the biggest moral boost I could have ever asked for. Why do I say so? When I took the change of role, we actually anticipated a longer duration of industrial unrest in the 4th year of operations. And this time we anticipated it would go probably even to a quarter. And remember, we were actually ramping up our business volumes and we started to grow in all the segments we were in, giving a tough challenge to the competition who had also come into the market by then. The challenge was not just about meeting the business volumes. The one most focus we had, important one, was to ensure that our customers, who are the main reasons for our business, should not suffer for their deliveries. Because as I said in the start, they are in seasonal business. And after investing such large sums of money for a passenger travel, and when the passenger demands are very high during the seasons, they need to be having their vehicles on time. So we set out on a strategy on how to be prepared with this anticipated strike during the third quarter of the year, and which was almost 7 months from the day we started. And that's what we are discussing today. Strategy. We devised some plans, set out to execute them with the support of select members from our plant who are also passionate about the company, the business, the product they're working with, and the leadership. So, do you think with all these things we could ever think of failure? Never. And even today, when we sit back with our colleagues and discuss these, it's such a great feeling. We did it. With 75 days of industrial dispute and unrest, we'd still managed to reach close to 90% of the volumes what we had set for ourselves. And the next year, we did set out for another plan, but that's the year when the market recession started to set in middle of the year. So we were actually falling short by 10% of the volumes than we set in. So what does this mean to business? It's being customer centric and working capital management. And why do I say so? As I said in the earlier slides, as we went up with the volume ramp up, we also had to manage our work in progress. So if we had to deliver 400 units of vehicles, we had to have a number of vehicles in the production line change on every year. As we ramp up from the first year to second year, we had to increase from 30 units to 40 units. But when the third year, when we actually had the first year of industrial dispute, we ended up with 90 units. And with so many parts fitted into a vehicle and being the top end with the parts price and the vehicle and the conversion costs being so high, with a very high work in progress, it means that we have blocked large amount of money into business. So my important task was to bring back the customer confidence in deliveries and also to get down onto the work in progress as per the business plan. And you would see that we achieved it actually at the end of the year. We came back to our business plan volumes and to the WIP. And so did we in the next year. Do we need to take a break? I think it must have been sounding like we just all sat through a storyline discussion from an yet to be produced Bollywood movie. Let's come back to today's agenda. How do we prepare? Because we started off saying we should have a goal, and we also saw through what happens when we have planned, prepared ourselves well, and we have executed it. How well it could turn out as a result. So, most important step in preparation is planning. Define the goals, identify the resources. Even more important is, when do we execute it? Who should be in your team? Not just your team. There is also sometimes a need to extend your network with external stakeholders as well. And while we do all these things, we should never forget the values and the priorities. Why are we doing it? As I said, being customer focused, ensuring deliveries on time. More importantly, where do we do this? Where do we want to reach? And last but not the least, what are the things we need to do? And that's the mission statement, as we know. Obviously, then if we have to have a good plan, we should also be able to execute it in a good way. Let's step on to see how do we move from strategy to success through execution. As I said, choose your team members, share the plan as appropriate, depending on, because a lot of times some of the strategic plans could be confidential. There could be some confidentiality aspects as well. Right at the start of the project, assign your responsibilities. Be ready with your alternate plans, because not with just one plan, you may not be able to achieve your end results. And most importantly, you should know when to switch over from one to another if one doesn't work. Throughout the execution, staying connected with the team is equally important. How do we do this? As I said, strategic management starts with defining a vision, which helps create a long-term goal on what we need to achieve. Then breaking them down into strategic objectives. Which are the key areas that needs to get addressed so that we are able to reach the goal, and which also has influences both from external and internal factors. Break them into targets, which can then be monitored on half-yearly or an annual basis. And then we are able to address each of these objectives. Detail out the plan, form teams, and identify leaders for each of those, who then would be delivering the results. It's important to have a good governance structure to review on a periodic basis so as to address any gaps. Finally, we come to benefits. What are the benefits that we achieve in a corporate environment? And I can say it's limitless. First of all, people, when they come forward into these teams, they're able to generate a lot of ideas. It gives an opportunity to each one of them to think out of the box. And thinking out of the box always leads to a lot of creativity. And when you're creative, you find different solutions to a problem. Once you have solutions, the next step is to detail out the plan. With all this, what actually happens is people feel positively motivated when they are aware of the leadership vision and the goals to be achieved. They feel encouraged to contribute, thinking out of the box. They feel they're part of the solution. There's a very high level of sense of achievement when the goals are reached. And at the business level, you have more brains to work, and the results are multifold. At an organizational level, there's a new culture that gets developed, which is then able to sustain the successes for the years to come. To summarize, we got to plan, we got to prepare, and then execute with the 7 simple steps. With that, I would like to end my session and would like to say thank you. And for those Students, be bold, be courageous, be your best. All the best for your academics.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mukund, so much. Students or anyone of the faculty members or the ones who are attending, other participants, if you have any questions, please raise them. Now, we'll have about 5 minutes for question answer session. You can unmute yourself and speak up. I guess they will come back later with their questions. Yes, sir.
Yeah. May I ask one question?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, Mr. Mukund, it was a wonderful insight into various strategic plans that you've been adopting at Volvo. I was just looking at one of the key values that you always talk about is the environmental concern. What goes into the mind is the carbon footprint. And how do you adopt strategy, or what are your strategies to minimize the carbon footprints?
Okay, what we do is right from the time we start to design a part or a product, we look at what kind of raw material content should go in. And we have a list of raw materials which are actually blacklisted from the materials which we can use. So that is the first input which goes into right from the time when we start to design the product. And then when we are working with the suppliers, we share with that and figure out from their processes is any of that particular material is being used. And that's also part of our purchasing when we do the supplier evaluation. It's a part of the supplier evaluation matrix where we go ahead and in-depth sort of audit with them to see if they use any of those materials. And if that, then we figure out a roadmap on when they would be phasing them out, or if they will use it in our parts what we would buy from them. So that is the way, that's the way we ensure that up to the last point, we would ensure that there's no way we are causing any damage to the environment. And even in our internal processes, we try and see if you could get into a zero waste or minimize the waste.
Okay, that was that. Thank you. And one more question I wanted to ask was about the credit period that you indicated, about 60 days credit that you have in your plan, and 50 days of RTGS. And how does it help you if you think about in terms of extending it further from 60 days to maybe 75 days, how difficult it is? I know it is very difficult even to get a negotiation done through for 60 days of credit. Yeah. And you've been successful in that. So if you look at it, the 50-day RTGS and the 10 days gap, the 10 days difference, how does it help you strategically?
We did do that. Say, for example, during the, I wouldn't say during this pandemic, but before that, and I think even during the pandemic last year, though I was not involved directly into that, the negotiations with the suppliers, when there was no business, obviously there's no cash flow happening, but there have been supplies which has happened and you are actually stuck with material which is not being used. So we did approach to the suppliers, and obviously everybody understands these dynamics. So we sometimes manage to get a temporary relief and extend the credit period time to time based on the situation. But there has been challenges that we need to extend it further, but we cannot extend it beyond a certain level unless the supplier organization is also large enough. You can't do it with the MSMEs. There are government guidelines how much of a credit we could go with certain MSMEs. So you need to work within those framework, because the moment you start to extend the credit period, they start to add the what you call the inventory carrying cost, or the capital cost of borrowing capital, right? So it eventually ends up increasing your part cost. We do that. Say if your cost of borrowing capital is higher than the interest which is charged by the supplier. I would rather do that because that still helps you extend the credit. So it's a lot of mathematics involved. So we need to be very critical, looking into the minutest of the details to see what actually benefits.
I'd like to ask a question, sir. I'd like to ask a question, sir. I mean, my question is a little different. I would want to know about your inventory model, and especially how you use it during contingencies like pandemic. How do you really relate to the demand, and how do you fulfill the needs when it comes to uncertainty or uncertain situations?
Good. I don't think any of us in our lifetime had studied in any institute how to manage a pandemic, right? So coming to addressing inventory management during pandemic is something which everyone is learning. And I don't think anyone would have succeeded in that, given the line of business we are in. I know there are a lot of businesses which have actually grown multifolds during the pandemic. Unfortunately, it's not been with the transport industry. As individuals, everyone is still having sort of stigma in traveling in public transport, but we want our business to grow, and there we want the public to come into the buses, and that's the contradiction, right? So we are still waiting for, I think with the coming in the vaccine and the reduced number of cases, we're still hoping that the public will come back to travel. So coming back to your question, what we have done is we have ensured that during this pandemic, we do not buy anything which would not be consumed in the coming few months, because the volumes have dropped drastically, and we bring in exactly the material which is absolutely required to be used just in time. So with that, we have drastically started to bring down our inventory levels, which also helps us in our cash flow management and not pile up, because most of the parts what we use do not have a shelf life challenge. So there we are not challenged, but there are certain parts which do have shelf life. There we have started to work with our suppliers, and they've also started to work at their back end to see how they can support us with enhancing the shelf life using some technology. I hope that helps you.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I have a question.
Yes, Bharat.
With your permission?
Of course.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Sir, I would like to know in Volvo's transport division, what are the tools and techniques that you use for production control?
Production control. Can you elaborate a bit more? What is it? What are you exactly looking for?
With regards to the control parameters in your transmission, I mean your transport lines, what are the tools and techniques that you would be using when it comes to the control parameters of production, controlling the production?
Okay. Typically, if you walk into our plant or a truck plant, we are all assembly units, which means we are not into high volume, automated processes, right? We as a bus manufacturer, as I said, you saw the volumes like 400, 500, which is like 2 units a day, which probably when you compare it with a car or a two-wheelers, they would churn out in multiple numbers within 1 hour. So that's a large difference. Hence, in our cases, it's more with respect to the assembly processes, what we do as a control mechanism, and try and use various problem solving techniques to figure out how we could improve upon. And if you look at our bus industry, it's more of a handicraft, you would say. There are 400 people on the line with 800 hands, typically building a vehicle like an artisan would build. So you can't put in an SPC control parameters to see how it's going on. It's more at the part level. When we are working with the suppliers, we look at how the part is produced. What are the processes they follow? And how do they bring in the control so that when we get the parts, we're able to do a plug-in and fit it. I hope it answered your question.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think our Professor Krishna Kumar, our HOD, has also joined. I would now request him to propose the vote of thanks.
Very good afternoon to all. It's been wonderful being a part of this webinar. On behalf of School of Management, the Presidency University, I would like to thank Mr. Mukund for providing valuable time for this webinar and explaining very lucidly through a wonderful presentation the nuances of operation strategy and also sharing his experiences. Thank you so much, Mr. Mukund. I also thank Dr. Amrita for planning and organizing this wonderful webinar. I thank all external guests, my fellow faculty and the students for being a part of this webinar. Once again, thank you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. I think we can end the session. Special reference to also Dr. Kunal, because he's been helping me to let me organize, all of this. And thank you to Sir Anil Gowda for accepting my request. And a big thank you to all the participants here. I think you can keep yourself muted. Okay. So thank you one and all, and thank you, Mukund. It was a pleasure listening to you. I think we can.
Pleasure was mine.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you, Mr. Mukund. Thank you, Dr. Amrita. Thank you, sir. Thank you, madam. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you.